The June numbers for the Ottawa real estate market are in, and taking a look at them, the first thing that jumps out is that the surface level numbers, the general market numbers, are pretty much exactly where you'd expect them to be relative to how things have been going in 2026 so far. May is normally the peak, June is usually down slightly, and that's exactly what happened this year. What's hiding underneath those surface numbers, though, are a couple of markets that are behaving extremely, extremely differently. And this is a theme we've been seeing over the last year or more now. Places with condo fees, places in condo buildings especially, are struggling. Places that have a little more space and places that don't have a condo fee are still holding up relatively well. And we're seeing low months of inventory, technically a seller's market in some sections of the Ottawa market. Today, we're going to take a look at the market in general and then zoom in on the single family homes to give you a good idea of what's going on and what you can expect for the rest of the year as we come to the end of what's normally the busiest selling season. Now we'll start where we always do with the general market numbers for sales volume. And again, this is compared to all of the Junes for the last 10 years. And you can see there's a real split that happened going into 2022. I'm always a little surprised when I see a low 2022 number until I remember kind of what happened in that year. Because the first part of 2022 up until February, March was the absolute peak of the COVID market. That was when prices were absolutely crazy. But then rates and stuff started to go up after that period, and we saw a really slow summer that year. So we've never really recovered from that. You can see that the sales volume has gone up a little bit since then. But for 2026, we are still well below the 10-year average. Mostly that was being dragged up by the preceding couple of years. We're actually down a little bit from last year as well as far as sales volume. But as far as what the last 5 years have been doing since that 2022 slump, we're pretty on par for a normal June. Now, this just shows the same sales data situation, just grouped a little bit differently. And we can see that compared to June of last year, we are down. Compared to last month, May, we're down as well, but that's pretty normal. I would say sales volume on an average year, and you can see it reflected in the chart here, kind of peaks in May. We see a steady increase from the beginning of the year up till May. And then June is sometimes we'll have a busier June than May, but usually May is the peak. And then we kind of slump down a little bit from there as we head into the summer. A bit of a pop again as we head into the fall once the kids are settled back into school, and then things absolutely die in November, December. Those are normally especially December is one of the quietest months that we see. As far as active listings, this is a story that's been consistent for the entire year so far, and June is no exception. We saw the high active listing numbers in 2017 kind of go down and relieve a little bit into 2020 and 2021 when we had very low inventory, when everybody was trying to buy everything and it was super easy to sell a house. And then we saw a fairly steady increase that has not abated heading into 2026. So this is the number of listings that's sitting on the market at the end of the month. And I think this is the first month this year where 26 has been higher even than that 2017 number. So we're really seeing a consistent buildup of inventory that isn't going away because there's just not enough buyers to absorb the inventory that sellers want to sell. And again, this is very inconsistent across market segments. So it's going to be really interesting when we look at these graphs for what's going on in the single family, the townhouse, and the condo market respectively. For months of inventory for the market in general, we can see we've seen a general increase. Months of inventory, again, one of my favorite stats to look at. Take the number that we just looked at, the number of listings on the market at the end of the month, divide it by how quickly those properties are selling, and it gives you a measure of absorption and a great leading indicator for where I think prices are probably going. So we can see we went from a very low 2.78 months of inventory in June 2025 up to 3.36 in June 2026, which is still relatively low. That 3.36 months of inventory actually represents what is technically a seller's market, although bordering on a balanced market. But that number is hiding what's going on beneath the surface in the different market segments. For average days on market, we're up 5% year over year. So last year we had just under 30 days for the average days on market. This year we're up to just over 31 days on market for the average property in Ottawa. And we are down ever so slightly, just under 1% month over month. So pretty consistent across May, June as far as how long it takes to sell the average property in Ottawa. So that does it for the market in general, but we're going to look at the single family numbers now. Again, I'm just going to cover single families today. So if you're somebody who wants to drill down on what's going on in the townhouse market, as well as the condo apartment market. We're going to get to those in the next week or two, so make sure you get subscribed to the channel to stay on top of what's going on in those different market segments, because they're very different in some cases to the numbers we're about to look at for the single family homes. And they tell a very different story than the stuff that we just looked at for the market in general. So looking at the single family home sales volume numbers, we can see that for 2026, we are just below that 10-year average, 719 total single family unit sales this year. We're down slightly from last year, but you can see compared to the last 5 years, it's actually the second best performing June that we've seen as far as single family sales. So for this specific sector of the market, things are not looking too bad. There is still demand for properties that have a little more space, properties that have a yard and room for kind of a family to grow into if you can afford this kind of place. And looking month over month, we're down slightly from May of 2026 to June 2026, but not too much of a decrease. Kind of what we expect. May is the peak, and then June sometimes can pass May, but for single family homes, that difference between May and June is not nearly as pronounced as it was for the entire market. For active listings, we can see again the trend for the last few years has not been as severe as it was for the market in general. We're still slightly below that 2017 inventory number. And while we've seen the same trend since kind of 2020, 21, 22, 23, all the way up to 2026, increased inventory sitting on the market at the end of the month, it hasn't been going up as quickly the last few years. And if you remember last month in May, it was actually flat year over year. So in June, we actually did go up a little bit for the inventory sitting on the market, but still relatively under control. And that'll translate in the months of inventory number that we're going to look at shortly as well. So months of inventory, we can see directionally we're up year over year, but we're up from 2.31 months of inventory, which is definitely seller's market territory, to 2.58, which is, getting closer to balanced market territory, but still definitely in the seller's market area. So we're seeing properties change hands relatively quickly in this section of the market. So if you have a well-presented, well-priced detached home in a reasonable price range, family-friendly neighborhood, you're going to be able to sell it no problem. You just have to be sharp with your marketing and make sure you're pricing to the recent comparables. In some cases, slightly below. It's very neighborhood dependent. Average days on market are fairly flat. Month over month, we saw a slight increase, so 25.6 to 26.6 days on market for the average detached property, or the average single family home, I should say. These numbers do include the semi-detached properties as well. And we're up about 2.3% year over year, so basically the same, 26.3 days to 26.9 days. Took about the same time in June of 2026 to sell a single family home as it did in June of 2025. Benchmark price, always one of the most important things to look at, and we can see we're fairly flat, down ever so slightly from last year. Now this is the benchmark price. This is the one that controls for outliers, so this is a fairly reliable number. Last year, we're sitting at about $725,000 for the average single family home, and we're down to about $720, so down about 0.7%. And then we're down from $723 last month to $720 in June. So that's mostly noise. The takeaway here is that pricing is fairly flat. Months of inventory is slightly higher, so it's taking slightly longer for listings to sell. But the single family home is really chugging along the last year or so. Things have not crashed. Things have not gotten better. Just very kind of steady as she goes. Buyers are being patient. Sellers in many cases are being patient too. And we're seeing that reflected in the sales price. People aren't letting their detached homes go for pennies on the dollar or anything like that. A good house, you do still have to pay a reasonable amount of money to get it. And that's where we are in June of 2026. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. If you have any specific questions about what's going on in your neighborhood, feel free to reach out anytime. We'll see you in the next couple weeks as we delve into the townhouse market and the condo market, respectively. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.